Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Infinite Danger Room. I'm Matt Price. I'm here with Anthony Brown, and we're going to give you kind of a deeper dive, a closer look into one of the big stories of the 1990s X-Cutioner song. This was a huge Marvel Comics crossover that was in 12 parts from November 1992 through early 1993. It ran in Uncanny X-Men, X-Men Volume 2, X-Factor, and X-Force, and featured Strife as the central villain. They came polybagged with a special trading card with like a strike file for personal characters from the crossover, like his take on each of these characters. And they were priced at $1.50. At the time, they had been $1.25, so we get a little extra quarter, pay for a trading card. I remember at the time, like after these came out, you kind of mark where in your X-Men run they were, because you'd have this little blue flap folded over, so you'd be like, okay, here's my comics. Oh, there's X-Cutioner song with the blue flap, and then there's the stuff that came after. So Anthony is going to give us kind of a dive into what happened in X-Cutioner's song, kind of talk about the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and just we're going to do a kind of a quick little episode on, if you haven't read it, if you want to read it, here's kind of what happened. Obviously, there'll probably be some spoilers.
20 years later.
20 years later, if you haven't got to it. So here we go. Anthony, take us into were you already reading X-Men? When did you come into it here? What was your interaction with this storyline?
I was already reading X-Men, but the reason this storyline kind of holds its own, a lot of significance for me, is this was the first comic or the first set of comics I actually bought with my own money, with my own allowance. I remember going to a gas station that I don't think exists anymore called Circle K, and ended up picking up part 5 of the series, which was an Uncanny X-Men story, where they're in the mansion and they're fighting Apocalypse, but also in that issue, the X-Force team ends up getting new uniforms. Nice. And so that was really awesome. Plus, it had the trading card inside. And so at the time, there was a lot of things that Marvel did with that series that made it different, new, and special that they hadn't done with other titles before, like the trading cards, like even the extra backup story that ended up coming a little bit later called Strike Files, where it was kind of a compilation of all of the information that he had compiled on all the different people. Also, at the end of it, the legacy virus was created as well. And so I ended up reading the story in various parts because it got so popular that I couldn't find all the issues. And so I remember being in one state, going through a gas station, and I ended up finding the last 2 issues 11 and issues 12, and knew kind of how the stuff ended, but didn't know kind of what took place in between.
Still had to go back and...
Right, because at that time, I was only reading a couple of comics, so it wasn't like it said to be continued in X-Factor and X-Force and all of these other books, but I wasn't reading a lot of those titles. I knew who the characters were because I collected the Marvel trading cards and was watching the X-Men cartoon on TV and all that fun stuff. So I had a great reference with who all the characters were and what their power sets were. But in terms of the story, it was just like, okay, how did we get here? But also, because of my history with it, I knew that Strife was Cable's clone. But in the story, the big reveal is when he takes off his helmet, like Strife is Cable's clone. So again, there was a lot in that series. And even at the beginning of the series, they're at a pep rally or a concert or something like that, and you see Professor X get shot right in the chest by Strife, who's impersonating Cable, and that was just, I don't know, insane to me to see. I mean, to see that's...
It's a huge cliffhanger, I think, because they kind of set up, as I recall, in 294, a lot of the characters at the time, okay, Lila Cheney is going to promote mutant diversity or peace or something, and so Charles Xavier's going to come talk about it, and you've kind of just set up the characters, you're just kind of getting introduced to them, and then who you think is Cable comes out and shoots the professor. I think, as I recall, that's the cliffhanger, right? That's right where
exactly. So that happens, and that's the end of the very first issue. But even within that first issue, you see a lot of things that that Marvel hasn't really swung back around on in some time. Archangel was dating a police officer named Charlotte, and she was a black lady, and so they had their relationship going on. Psylocke had just started her psychic seduction of Cyclops, and so him and Jean Grey are on a date, and he's with Jean, but he's thinking about Psylocke because Psylocke is seducing him psychically, and all of the fun stuff that happens there. And then they get attacked by the Brotherhood, or what do they call? I forget what they called Strife's group. I think
is it the MLF or is it the Horsemen?
It was the MLF, the Mutant Liberation Front.
Okay.
But then I think they also went by the Brotherhood at some point, or some new version of Brotherhood. So Caliban shows up, and he's ripped and muscular, and he's fighting Jean Grey and Cyclops, and the Four Horsemen do show up of Apocalypse, and they end up fighting Plague and Pestilence and all of those people. So the entire series is a lot of fun. You even now that I am aware of who particular artists were, it was really interesting to see who was doing the art on the title at the time, because Brandon Peterson was doing Uncanny X-Men at the time. Greg Capullo, who's famous these days for his run on Batman, was actually doing X-Force at the time. And so in issue 4 you see X-Force, who's on the run because they're after Cable.
Right, the other teams.
The other teams are after Cable, and they think that they're tied to them, and so you get a fight. In issue 4 is basically the 3 other X-Men teams, X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold, and X-Factor, fighting against X-Force.
Right.
And you see, Wolverine and his group of people going hunting for the members of X-Force. And one of the great panels in it is Wolverine sneaks up on him, and he ends up sticking 2 of his claws between someone's neck, and he's like, you don't want the third one to come out, and they finally just give up the struggle. But it really is a great fight between the teams, during the whole struggle. So and then you also see some cool team ups, because at the end of issue 5 you see Cable, Bishop, and Wolverine all teaming up to go off and do to go off and find Strife and do what it is that they're
by
going to
part
do.
5 or so. They realize that Cable's not
right. Well,
like Wolverine is able to suss it out or something.
Exactly, and so that was really awesome, because those were 3 of the biggest, baddest characters at the time, and so it's just like, hey, we're gonna team up and we're gonna go handle and just do all of this stuff, and it's really just, it's a fun, insane ride.
Right.
You see Strife pulling out basically the Sword of Apocalypse, which at the time I had known that this particular artifact existed, but apparently it was the only thing that could kill Apocalypse. So you see Strife and Apocalypse fighting, and they, talk about their history with each other, and then he stabs him right in the chest with this sword. And over the course of the last 2 issues, issues 11 and 12, you see Apocalypse struggling along, and eventually it seems like he has died as a result of this. And you see Archangel gloating over him, and at one point Iceman and Bishop try to stop him from going after him, and he's like, if he's in his final moments, I'm going to be there to save her in his misery. And so they do that and stand over him, and it's really it's really a cool scene to see, just how dark Archangel had become at that time. And he had been darker and grim, but especially with his, I'm going to say, mad on to get rid of Apocalypse.
Get rid of Apocalypse for sure. Art-wise, you mentioned Capullo. It had one of the things I think worked really well about this crossover, because they were all sort of, not that I'm necessarily a polybagging fan, but it was very clear what was part of the crossover.
Right.
They were in polybag, these were the ones that were part of it. And also you had each artist did 3 issues. There wasn't jumping around.
Exactly.
It was, Capullo did 3 issues of X-Force. Jay Lee did 3 issues of X-Factor. Andy Kubert did 3 issues of X-Men, and then Brandon Peterson did Uncanny, and so it was consistent look for each book. Jay Lee, I think, was super hot at the time. I remember those X Factor issues, because X Factor was a little slightly less, I guess, selling book probably than the others. Like, those prices shot up on those X Factor issues for a while, right when they first came out.
Man, I hated that art. Like, even now,
yeah, you're not a big Jay Lee guy?
I am. I'm a fan of his stuff on, like...
like Hell Shock or something?
Yeah, or even his more refined... Like, his stuff seemed too raw for me, because at that time, like, I don't know. I'm maybe single digits in age, or 10, 11, 12, whatever it is.
And it's a little different than what you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's not well defined. And when I'm comparing that against the Capullo, again, Brandon Peterson, Kubert
more
stuff,
stylized.
Exactly. Like, I'm coming off of the Jim Lee stuff, right? Because he did Uncanny, then he switched over to regular X-Men and things like that, and so it's just like, that's kind of the standard, and then you get a more abstract...
Well, and he had followed Larry Stroman, who's also kind of that way, a little more abstract, I think, in his look. So maybe that was the book they felt like they were going to push the envelope on a little bit. But I remember it being pretty popular. I mean, I remember those books being pretty popular, and those getting hard to get, the X Factor one specifically.
I want to say issue 6 was an X Factor title, and that was actually the last book that I had to find, because it was that hard to find. Like, I ended up getting it out of state, like from another comic shop, not the local comic shops that I was visiting growing up, because like that issue was so hard to find. Like,
yeah, and like Peter David was writing it,
right?
And I think he did a good job of. Even if you hadn't followed the whole crossover, you kind of got something out of each individual issue of like, oh, this guy is this guy's brother, or these guys used to be on a team together. He did a good job of filling in a lot of the personality in those issues as well.
Exactly. Because you see, old drawbacks to Rusty and Skids, they show up in some issues. You see a lot of old characters and even old relationships kind of tie in and tie out, but also plot advancement. So it's like, okay, so now that we're a team now, what are we going to do after this? So, one of the titles or in the X-Force title that came after, where Capullo was doing the art, one of the iconic covers is like all of them in their new costumes, and they're holding guns and things like that, and basically they're going to raid S.H.I.E.L.D. and do all that because G.W. Bridge is mad at Cable because he still thinks that he's involved in the story, and so it's the assault on Graymalkin is the name of the trade. But that cover's kind of iconic for X-Force, but a lot of the things that happen out of that spun directly out of X-Cutioner song, and obviously the legacy virus and what ended up becoming of that is one of the final panels in X-Cutioner's song. So,
and I think you mentioned, of course, this Wolverine Cable Bishop all team up in, I think, X Factor 85, and it continues on from there.
Right.
That's the first time I think those two characters, Bishop and Cable, meet.
Exactly.
And of course they become intertwined for years in some kind of ways.
Exactly. So there's a lot of just kind of landmark things that happen there that lay the groundwork for so much to come. Even Cable's, supposed death, because in the final issue, he ends up, rigging himself up with a bunch of explosives, and him and Stryper fighting, just trading blows and doing all that, and then he tells Cyclops, like, hit the button to blow himself up, and Cyclops doesn't really want to do it because he knows Cable is his son now, and he doesn't want to kill him and send him to his death. But obviously, because Cable's Cable, and he gets to come back more times than his mom does.
Yeah.
He ended up coming back shortly thereafter in his own solo series that obviously
he started out in the future and then eventually worked his way back.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is usually what happens with Cable when he dies. Like, hey, I'm just gonna pop up in the future somewhere and be like, yeah, about that, And obviously there's some tweak with his powers, because that's the other thing that happens is like, yeah, my telekinesis is always on the fritz, or the TO virus is causing me issues and things like that, and so. At this point, is he free of that? Like, at one point he was free of it. Now I think it's back. He was a member.
At one point he definitely was, but I'm not sure now.
He was a member of the Uncanny Avengers, and I mean all of that fun stuff that's going on with him now. It's just really hard to keep track of.
So how would you say this stacks up among the great X-Men storylines?
I don't know. I don't know that I've ever taken the time to rate them. Maybe that's a podcast we could do, is just rate the X-Men.
Yeah, crossover
events. Again, for me, because of the nostalgia and everything else, like, this is a 7 or an 8, especially when you look at the event itself,
right?
And then what it gave birth to, and and everything that the event itself and also what it gave birth to me was really awesome.
For sure, yeah, I can see that, and it had a satisfying, even though they did spend some time, a satisfying conclusion, which is hard to do in monthly comics, to have something that kind of stands on its own and works as a story in and of itself.
Because even the next event that followed that was Fatal Attractions, and that to me wasn't as satisfying as this, because it was just like, well, there aren't 12 stories.
There's a lot of things that happen,
right?
But it's maybe less cohesive.
And it doesn't point, like, so with X-Cutioner's song, on every comic, it's one, like, it had a little triangle that says 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. With Fatal Attractions, it wasn't that linear, where it's just like, at the end of the title, you knew to go get this, but it was just like, well, Cable ends up getting ripped apart by Magneto, and it's just like, so where exactly does that fit into this, and kind of so on and so forth.
No, I think it's almost one of the perfect ways to do a crossover like this, if you're gonna. And I don't know why they haven't gone back to that format. Even if you didn't do the poly bags, you'd think it would be relatively easy to be like have a banner and a part 1, and I don't know if they just want to do more tie-ins, but I feel like this worked in a very cohesive way.
Right. I agree. I'd love to see them get back to that and even push the trading cards. Obviously, Marvel was still making the trading cards. I forget. I think the last set of things I bought probably had a 2010 date on them. But I know that they're still doing that. But it would be really awesome, because you saw them go back to the Jim Lee, and I don't think it was Upper Deck that made them, but recently they did the Jim Lee trading card cover, variants for comics. So, I don't know, maybe you get whoever the new Jim Lee is and say, hey, you're going to do these cards, and I don't know, maybe you bring Stripe back, call it X-Cutioner's Song 2. I don't know, and run it back in some way, shape, or form. I felt like with the way that Marvel is writing things now, to me, the big events don't carry the same weight that they did in the past. But I understand we're in a new day and age where, with social media and things like that, you kind of want to hype stuff up, and with the way the previews come out now and everything else, like, for me, as a kid, I didn't buy previews, and even then they were really hard to, I guess they were hard to come by, I don't know. I was just reading X-Men, and then this event started, and it was just like, oh, wow.
This is happening, sure.
Yeah, and I was just like, this is awesome.
Obviously, I think it was, getting that information across was not done the same way, back then, for a lot of reasons.
Like, even, let's fast forward a couple of years, to the Onslaught stuff. I had no idea what came next after, the Marvel Universe Onslaught tie-in, where all the heroes seemingly sacrificed themselves, and the only ones that were left were mutants, and it was just like, okay. And then it was just like, here's these 4 new number 1s for, Avengers, Iron Man, Hulk, or what was it? Avengers, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, and Captain America.
Right.
And it was just like, okay, now what is happening, or what's going to happen with all this stuff? And, the Heroes Reborn stuff was amazing. But I think that there's a lot of lessons that Marvel can learn about past events. And I don't know, I would say, I know that Marvel has said that they want to try to be less event focused with this legacy stuff. That seems to have been shot straight out the window with, what is it, there are 4 different Wolverine series about finding Wolverine.
There are. Now, I think, in fairness, they may have said we don't want to do a universe-spanning one where, say, Civil War II crosses into every book we have, but we maybe have Wolverine when they're sort of more... Well, X-Cutioner Song we count more as a X-Men event. It wasn't Spider-Man didn't get involved, or
Right.
you know, Ms. Marvel or whatever was not involved. It was focused on the X-Men.
Well, I think, but I guess that's the point. Is that I would love to see them do more self-contained events in and of themselves. We're like, hey, over the next 9 issues, we're going to do this. We're going to tell that story. You know, and have it really be focused around the characters and things like that. Whereas, and which is why I really enjoy, or I've heard, and I haven't read all of it, but what's going on with Avengers right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Focused on just Avengers.
Yeah, it's focused on just Avengers, and it feels to me like an old school Avengers.
Yeah.
Like a big story, like World War Kang,
Right.
Or I mean, basically anything Kree Skull War.
A lot of the stuff back in the day that
and
was just more focused on the one book.
Exactly, and I think that's my personal preference for how this stuff should go, and the big events like Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Should be once every 4 years, kind of like the World Cup, where it's like we're building towards all this stuff instead of it being every summer or like here's the big fall event, here's the big summer
Right,
event.
and they're just constantly rolling.
And you basically have 6 months, or basically 6 months worth of issues in between.
Right.
And then it's like, here's 6 issues, and now here's another big event. And it's just like, well, man, I need time to breathe and
Sure.
on these things, because after every event, like, here's some new number ones and here's some new number ones. You know, every 4 years, let's bang out, or even
A
if it's
big
every
one. Well,
other-
kind of like maybe DC would do their
exactly.
Crisis, and then it would be like 4 years till they do 0 Hour.
Exactly.
There'd be maybe some crossovers in between there, but it would be maybe a gap. Like they would do, I don't know, and maybe I'm not giving the time exactly right, because I know Legends and Millennium came in between Crisis and 0, but it didn't feel like it was a big...
Those weren't...
They were big crossovers, but they weren't just, I don't know. Maybe I may not be saying this exactly
What
right,
was
but
it,
you know
that
what I
World
mean?
War III, not World War III, what was the, basically Superman, Our World's at War or whatever?
Yeah,
Like, that was a huge event, but it was just like...
in the Superman books, mostly.
Right. And I mean, obviously some titles had crossovers. Like, I remember I was reading... The only DC book that I was reading at the time was Young Justice, and even that had a crossover into it. But those things, again, like it there's, to me, a way for these things to feel, and I think that's why comic book fans of yesteryear that still read today get so upset by the way that these things are handled, because in the past there was a more organic feel to how these events came along. And it wasn't, well, we signed new writer X, and so now we're going to put him on this big project and say, here you go, make everything happen, and oh, by the way, let's kill 7 people.
Or if they did, we didn't know about it. I mean,
exactly. You know. And I just think that, you know, I get that you want to move the merchandise and sales, and it's more expensive to publish comics now than it was then, and all the logistics of that. But I think that for the longest time, Marvel had a formula that was kind of like, I don't know, the whatever how many flavors are the secret herbs and spices in KFC. Like,
right.
They had their formula, and no matter where you were putting it, especially in the 90s, it
kind of
really
worked to some degree.
Yeah, it worked in the 90s, 2000s, and everything else. Even how they kind of cleaned up the Avengers, because if you look at the Avengers around the 400s, the 390s, the Avengers, the Crossing, like, it had kind of spiraled into a hot mess.
Yeah.
The Wasp was killed, but then came back, like, actually looking like
an insect,
wasp.
right?
Yeah, you know, and then, like, Tony Stark got replaced by teenage Tony Stark and the whole bit, and it was just like, this was kind of a mess. But then the Onslaught deal came and cleaned that up, and it felt like a good way to do that. That made sense, because like, literally the story with Professor X and Onslaught had been brewing way before all of this other stuff had taken place.
I'm not sure that wasn't a happy accident to some degree, but that's probably a whole other show. How did Onslaught work, and how did that tie into the X-Trader? Yeah. And was that, and how much of that was planned, and how much of that was just they happened to fall into it?
Right.
But like I said, that probably takes another
Well, I mean,
quite a bit.
I mean, that's actually what happened with the most recent Secret War, right? Like, Hickman said that, and I mean, you can see this by the way it played out. Secret War was a Fantastic Four, and he didn't want to call it that, but it was a Fantastic Four story that Marvel said, you need to make this an Avenger story. So then he had to figure out how to tie all the people in. But when you really look at the event, it's basically all about the
Fantastic Four story in a lot of ways. Yeah.
It's about the Fantastic Four with all these kind of other ancillary parts, because it's Doctor Doom versus Mr. Fantastic.
Sure. Sure.
You know, with other people sprinkled in there because it's like, hey, these are Avengers books, but you know, I mean, because even the new Avengers title, they should just call that Illuminati and just ran with it, but they wanted to slap the Avengers brand on it.
Sure. I mean, again, a lot of it's probably for sales. We may have gone a little bit afield from X-Cutioner song there at the end, but there's some more information for you.
Exactly.
X-Cutioner song is available, I think, in trade paperback. I think you still get the trade paperback now.
Oversized hardcover. I believe it's on, whatever digital Marvel Digital or Comixology Digital as well. And
probably diggable out of back issues as well. Probably findable as well that way. And you would get the cool trading card if you go dig in the back issues. Okay, well, hey, so this is X-Cutioner song. We hope we've enticed you to maybe check it out or spurred some of your nostalgia if you had checked it out before. Maybe we'll revisit some other classic X-Men and other storylines in the future on the Infinite Danger Room. We'd love to hear what you think. You can write us a review on iTunes or give us a rating. You can also listen to us on SoundCloud or newsok.com. You can email us at infinitedangerroom@gmail.com or tweet at us at DangerInfinite on Twitter, or find us on Facebook where we are Infinite Danger Room there. We'd love to hear your comments there as well. For Anthony Brown, I'm Matthew Price. Thank you for listening.